Welcome, everybody, to a great event with a wonderful secretary here, Secretary Pompeo. Before I start with questions, I know all of you have Secretary Pompeo's bio in front of you here today, but I couldn't think of a better person to be here today to talk about what's going on in the world and the volatile situations that we have around the globe, and to talk about some of the threats that America faces. Before I do that, I'm going to read a little bit of Secretary Pompeo's bio because I think it's important. Secretary Pompeo was born in Orange, California, attended undergrad at the United States Military Academy, where he finished first in his class in 1986. He then served as a cavalry officer patrolling the Iron Curtain before the fall of the Berlin Wall with the 2nd Squadron, 7th Cavalry in the U.S. Army's 4th Infantry Division. Upon leaving active duty at the rank of captain, Mike went on to earn his law degree at Harvard Law School, where he was the editor of the Harvard Law Review. In the mid-1990s, Secretary Pompeo moved to Wichita, Kansas, where he founded Thayer Aerospace, serving as the CEO of the company for more than a decade. As many of you know, he was elected to Congress in 2010, serving Kansas' 4th Congressional District from 2011 to 2017. During his time in Congress, he served on the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, House Energy and Commerce, and of course, the House Select Committee on Benghazi. Following the 2016 election, President Trump selected Mike to be the director of the CIA, where he served for over a year. Then in March of 2018, at the time, President Trump nominated Mike to serve as the Secretary of State, which he did through the remainder of President Trump's first term. So, Secretary Pompeo, welcome. We thank you for your service, both in the military and to our country, and also for your commitment and dedication to upholding democratic principles and our values. And so, welcome, Secretary Pompeo.
Hey, great, thank you. It's great to be here. Darin, by the way, when your bio was read, they left off just generally good dude. Darin
well
is
said.
No, it's so true, and so lovely that we get a chance to be here. It's great to see so many of you. We'll talk about a bunch of things. Some of you, I know from before. You all look older. I look just the same, but Cannon's still under construction, so some things do never change, it's really special for me to get a chance to be with you, Darin, to be back here to talk about things that matter an awful lot. They may not impact you every day in the way that the tax provisions will, but there's no doubt these things matter a lot to you and to your families and to the work that's done here on Capitol Hill. So I look forward to a lively conversation.
Excellent. I'm going to start off with a few questions here, and then we're going to open it up for the audience for questions that you may have too. Secretary Pompeo, as we think about our adversaries around the globe and some of the hot spots, whether it's China and how do we win the strategic competition against China, whether it's the ongoing conflict in Ukraine or the ongoing wars in the Middle East with the winding down of the war with Hamas and currently what's going on with Hezbollah in Lebanon, a lot going on the globe. Let me start with China. Secretary, as you remember, we created this Congress a new select committee on China. We did that in a bipartisan way to really figure out how do we win the strategic competition against China. And there is no doubt, I always say this, China has a plan to replace the United States, and they're working at it every single day. They want to beat us technologically, economically, militarily, diplomatically. And so, Secretary, I guess the first question, in looking at that, in your view, what are the most pressing threats posed by the malign influence of the CCP, and how should we in the U.S. address them to protect the interests and maintain a competitive edge?
Well, we're going to be here a while. So maybe I guess three thoughts, Darin, on this. First, we talk about these things, right? You mentioned Ukraine, the Middle East, China, as if they are disconnected. They're not. They're all deeply connected. The Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans, the Venezuelans are all working together to undermine our way of life here, to change the fundamental direction for the United States. And so I'll focus here, because you've asked it, on the threat from the Chinese Communist Party under Xi Jinping, which is a mouthful, but I always say it that way because I want 1.2 billion Chinese people to be successful. Doesn't have to be this way. Xi's just a bad dude, bad guy. There's a path forward for them which can change this. But today, this is what we confront. Xi Jinping, who truly wants to change the way the world operates, without human dignity, basic fundamental human rights, without property rights, without contracts, with a set of trade rules that are not reciprocal. His goal is truly global hegemony for a Chinese model for the world, and he's got a big nuclear arsenal and a big military and a lot of capacity to do that. So what to do? How should the United States, and when I think about this too, we've got Australians and folks from France here today, how should the West, the good people of the world, how should we respond to this challenge? And I guess I'd start with mindset. We have to win. And often in the West, we think we'll just manage this, we'll find our way through it, and gosh, if we can fight it to a draw, there'll be better days ahead. We're right. We should have the confidence that goes with being right, and that means we should prevail. And so we can talk about what that all means, what does winning look like, but in the end, the model that we have, the central ideas that our founders left us, are the central thesis of American power and success, and what makes that blue passport that you Americans hold so important and so powerful. It's why people want to come here to study. Like, no one wants to go, like some kid in Africa doesn't grow up saying, yeah, I think when I go to college, I want to go to Tehran State, right? Or to Moscow U, right? No, nobody, there's no kid dreaming of that in Nigeria today. Why? And that's because we got to get this, we got to have the confidence that our ideas are the right ideas to deliver for the next billion people on this planet and for America and for our people. Second, this conflict with China is mostly economic. They have been at war with us for 40 years as an economic matter. And we've had the model since Dr. Kissinger went to China in 1972 that said, engage more, they'll become more like us. And I'll never be as smart as Dr. Kissinger. He and I had this debate many times. We never came to an agreement before he passed away. He may have been right in 1972. He might have been right in 1982. By 2022, it had proven ineffective to protect America. And so we need to confront their economic aggression with the central thesis there being reciprocity, right? Your rules, our rules, whatever rules, we're going to operate under the same set of rules. And if you have that as your guiding principle, you can begin to think about legislation, export controls, all the tools that can get you to the right economic outcome. They are not 10 feet tall. Their economy has challenges. Our model is better. The innovation and technology in the world must come from the West. It must be baselined in the West. And we can get there with a good set of policies, not just from the United States, but from the rest of the good guy GDP, which today is about 3/4 of the world's GDP. India, Japan, Singapore, South Korea, Europe, our friends in the Middle East, about 70% of the global GDP. We need to get that number to 80 or 90. And when we do, we'll get it right. Last thought on China. When we think about it, we often immediately, when you say China, reflexively, it's Taiwan. When I think about China, I think reflexively, oh my gosh, they're in Houston. Right, I think about the campaign they are waging right around us, right, by the way, on Capitol Hill massively, in every capital in America, including Topeka, Kansas. We saw what happened in the governor's office in New York. You all would have witnessed the Trump administration. I ordered, with the president's approval, the direction to close the Chinese consulate in Houston, Texas. By the way, any Texans in here? I created the greatest real estate opportunity for Texans in the world. It's a beautiful piece of property. That was an outcome, not a goal. Right, they were running the largest espionage operation ever conducted in the United States of America from a consulate in Houston, Texas, and we had known about it for years and did nothing. I say, and so we got one right, and we made it better for a little bit. The information warfare, the campaign being waged in boards of education, the Chinese consulate will attend PTA meetings in your hometown. You don't go to the PTA meetings, right? This is an at depth, at scale operation with the mission set to convince us that America is degenerate and in decline. And I don't believe that to be true. And when Xi Jinping says it, he is not being observational. He's not just identifying something. He's driving that. And today they can talk to your kids and grandkids without your intermediation. No disintermediation. The Chinese can message about, the founders had it wrong, America stinks, you all fight these wars for global superiority, and the Chinese model is a better model. And we have to figure out a way to make sure that our children and grandchildren grow up understanding that that's just not right, and that information fight is real and serious and hard.
Thank you for that. Next, there's been an argument made over the last 4 years that there's been a lack of U.S. leadership on the global stage. And because of that lack of leadership, it's created avenues and spaces for our adversaries, China, Iran, North Korea, Russia. And as we look over the next 4 years here, how can we, or what advice do you have, Mr. Secretary, on looking at the pressing threats? How do we reinvigorate our presence abroad, particularly partnerships with our allies and like-minded allies, so that we can push back on authoritarianism around the globe?
That's a good question. And coming from someone who operated with America first, we were often accused of walking away from the global stage. I don't even want to, there's no need to respond to that, other than to say, we did manage to achieve deterrence. And what has been lost in each of those places is the adversary's perception that America was a badass. Right, that's like a little vulgar language, but this is a tough, evil world out there, and so it's appropriate to use adult words sometimes, although neither my wife nor my pastor would approve. There's a handful of things that go in that bucket. So, look, they have to be convinced that where America says these are the things that matter to us, and there are deep interests, that we're actually going to defend them. And when we say we're going to, we will. And we can't, and when I stare at it, and I don't mean this politically remotely, because we got things wrong in the Trump administration too. So I don't intend it this way, but when you call an ally a pariah in the Middle East, when you say, well, a minor incursion into Europe might be okay, when they fly a balloon over your country and you do almost nothing, independently, each of these, you go, that's just a missed opportunity perhaps. Cumulatively, they messaged the bad guys that they could take risks, that they could push, that they could challenge, they could confront and take and see what the response was. And so, my over simple lunchtime answer to that is you have to go back and get on the front foot again. These are harder problem sets than we encountered when we came in 2017 today. That will be confronted by Senator Rubio, or soon-to-be Secretary Rubio. These will be harder problems today than we confronted. But in the end, the theory of the case has to be, you can't go fight every battle. You can't send the 82nd Airborne every place always. But you can use the American economy and the enormous power that comes with our place in the world to convince the bad guys that you shouldn't mess with this sheriff. And President Trump is, in some ways, like you talked about the fact that I made it to the end of the administration. That quite an accomplishment. There are a few Americans that can say that. My hair's grayer and all that. But the reality is that we were either sufficiently unpredictable or sufficiently prepared to draw fewer red lines and then enforce them, that I think our adversaries were very cautious in being aggressive. They didn't invade Ukraine on our watch. You didn't see what happened on October 7th in Israel on our watch. President Trump would say they wouldn't have happened if we were still there. I don't say that. I simply state because I can't prove it. But here's what I can prove. It didn't happen on our watch. Right? That is undeniable. That's factually true that we had no new wars that were begun. We didn't have the Middle East rolled through by Iran, and we didn't have Europe rolled through by Putin. And you can either say God was smiling on us, which I believe, that we were lucky, or you can say no, there was deterrence, and I think that was it. And that's what the next administration will have to find a way to get back, and that the Biden administration, sadly for America, lost.
Thank you. Want to turn to Ukraine and ask your opinion. Some people say this last 10 days we've had kind of an inflection point with now the Ukrainians using the Army tactical missile system to strike deep into Russia, which has not happened in the past. And as we look at what's going to happen over the next 60 days before the new Trump administration comes in, what do you see as kind of the roadmap for the conflict there, whether that'll be escalated because of the new use of this weaponry, and what happens from here forward?
Well, it's hard to know what the next 60 days looks like. This morning I read, I think it's right, that the first intercontinental ballistic missile in civilizational history was fired into a sovereign nation. That's really quite something. It could have carried a nuclear payload, if I understand the missile that it was on correctly. We'll have to see if the reporting bears that out. It didn't. But man, that's a message, right? What will the American response be to an ICBM fired into Europe by Russia? I have a guess. They'll send someone to negotiate to say, gosh, can we just not all get along? That's a mistake. It requires a real response. I don't know what the next 60 days look like because it's very difficult because everyone's truly messaging the Trump administration, right? That's what this is all about. This is no longer, they're not really thinking about dealing with Secretary Blinken and Jake Sullivan. They're thinking about dealing with Mike Waltz and Secretary Rubio and President Trump. So I don't know how the Russians will play this. The Ukrainians are going to use this moment to try and get to a better place so that when these negotiations begin, I would argue they've already begun, but as they continue, at least, everybody wants to say, no, we're in a better, more leveraged position. So I think you'll see more and more of this. And I regret, right, the decision to allow these strikes across the line. Everybody in my party does not agree with this. I have been arguing since, frankly, the fall of 21, when we knew that this invasion was going to take place, that this required a deep, robust response, not to send our kids. Nobody's asked for an American soldier or sailor or airman. But we should send our stuff and help these folks. And we didn't. And now, oddly, President Biden chooses after the election to do this. You all can speculate why. I have no theory of the case. But oddly, he did do what I would do is the right thing. But gosh, 2 years and change too late. It's going to be a very rugged couple months, and that's probably true in the Middle East. And we shouldn't forget there are conflicts at least 6 other places as well. Smaller, we don't pay as much attention, but what's the devastation in Sudan? There's a long list of places that are really troubled, and we haven't been able to find a method to slow that down.
Thank you. Maybe one more question, then we'll open it up to the audience here. I want to just turn to the Middle East here. Obviously, October 7th of last year, we saw what happened in Gaza and the war that transpired, and it appears that it's winding down now. I know when you were secretary and a member of Congress, you took a keen interest in Lebanon. You had a Lebanese population in Wichita. As we look at the taking out of Nasrallah and the entire dismantling of Hezbollah in Lebanon, I don't think anybody could have ever envisioned that happening, and the Israelis did that. That was the cancer within Lebanon. And as we look at how do we fill that vacuum and void in southern Lebanon in particular and get Lebanon back on track, any thoughts on how that can happen, or what should our policy be moving forward to help make that happen?
Yeah, we didn't quite get this right either. Indeed, I didn't get Lebanon right on my watch. As much as I love that place, and Beirut is one of my favorite cities in the whole world, we didn't improve our lie, America's lie, or frankly the lie of the Lebanese people either. Now there is a window of opportunity. Well, here's what the tendency, and the Biden administration is doing this, right? So we have Amos Hochstein there negotiating for a ceasefire today. I don't even know what that means. Like, people talk about, like, the day after. Like, what's it look like on the day after? Like, the day after what? Right? They've been going at this for 3,000 years. And if you don't want to give me 3,000 years, at least since 1948, right? Since the founding of the nation-state of Israel. This is an enormous window of opportunity. This is not about Beirut. This is not about Damascus. This is not about Baghdad. This is not remotely about Gaza or Judea and Samaria. This is about Tehran. And the Israelis have even against our best, the administration's best wishes, have created this enormous opportunity to fundamentally change the shape of the region. And so there's 2 things that I hope the next administration will do. One, you have to rebuild trust and confidence in our Gulf Arab allies. They have to have confidence that the United States will be with them in the toughest days, even when we don't think their behavior is perfect, that we're going to be their partners and friends. And they know their threat isn't from Israel, right? No Saudi citizen worries about missiles out of Israel. They worry about missiles out of Esfahan, And so it's possible to build that. And then second, you can't have this gap that we have with Israel today. You can't have this public space with Israel, who is our friend and partner extraordinaire. And so if you do those two things, you can build out a model. You can't go back to, there's a UN resolution called 1701. Never in 16 years of failed enforcement, the only ones who complied were the Israelis. And as we were really good in the Trump administration, when there was a deal we were in and we were the only one complying, we just, it's not a deal, that's just a piece of paper. And we can't go back to 1701. There has to be a very different model to give the Lebanese people a fighting chance to restore their country as well. And if you can do that, Lebanon is the perfect place. It's got the right mix of Christians, Sunni, Shias, Druze. Lebanon is the right place that you've got some infrastructure to go build back upon, and you can begin to turn that. And the Gulf Arab states will help underwrite that in deep and important ways. I'm really, as tragic as what has happened has been, I hope that there's this opportunity to change this dynamic where Tehran recognizes it needs to go back in its box. And I pray that can be pulled off with all of us.
Question, Mr. Secretary, on legislation. If you were to advise the Congress, if there's one piece of legislation you would say, you've got to pass this. I know, Mr. Hood, your committee with the China Select Committee, you come up with a lot of great policy ideas, but is there one, Mr. Secretary, where you'd say, you've got to pass this one if you were advising the Congress?
You've got to get these tax provisions done. That's where this all started. Right? I mean, it's like my most important tool as Secretary of State, as much as I love tanks and missiles, the Army guy, my most important tool wasn't the military. We need to get the military, be bold. It's the American economy. Right? If you can't drive GDP growth in the United States, A, you can't climb out of $35 trillion in debt, and B, the Secretary of State is not important without American innovation, technology, manufacturing, service sector that goes around the world delivering great outcomes for people and makes ungodly money for the United States of America. And so if those tax provisions blow up, Katie bar the door, not just for the American economy, but for the global economy too. You'll see global GDP shrink. So I would start there, and I know that's hard, and I know, Darin, you'll get it done. It's great. I just get to write op-eds and pontificate now. I'm like, yeah, that's good. Yeah. If I was there, that'd have got done. I'm always mindful it's easy on the outside. The second thing that you stare at, you watch what Mr. Musk and Mr. Ramaswamy are going to try and do. You can't get at any of that without fixing the healthcare system. And you can get rid of all the foreign aid you want. You can shrink the Department of Education, and you can go look at it doesn't solve the fiscal problem, isn't remotely addressed, nor is the competitive problem, the global competition problem that is cost for people who are trying to make stuff here in America. And so you have to get markets reintroduced into the healthcare system. And the tax problem is hard. This is 3 twists on that. But Republicans have just walked away from talking about healthcare for an awfully long time. We get all bottled up because they want to show the commercial driving granny off the cliff or what have you. Kind of lean into this. And one of the things that Vice President Harris campaigned on was price controls. We have them today in that particular market. We should be driving all the folks in that space who are trying to put competition back in the model. And I think it's possible to do. There are lots of think tanks, there's lots of scholars, the conservative scholars who have done this, who can begin to build around the edges to tackle this challenge that we're all going to face. I'm looking around the room, there's a lot of people a lot younger than me. My Social Security check and Medicare, they're going to clear. My son's maybe going to be a grandpa in March, no chance if we don't go tackle this. And so if you said, what's the other thing that there should be, and I know this is really hard and it's generic, but man, you can begin to chip away at it's not even the total cost, it's the value driving inside the healthcare system to get both pharmaceuticals priced properly. We saw what Mark Cuban's talking about, like that's a tragic idea. Certainly for a conservative, it's a tragic idea. And we've seen the price control model. They're going to make it really hard. I was the 70th Secretary of State. They're going to make it really hard for the 75th Secretary of State if we don't figure out how to get those pieces right. So those are the two. They have nothing to do with what I did in at
As it
CIA.
relates to China.
What's that?
As it relates to China, any piece of legislation?
It's just too hard to unpack. I'm very worried about this information space here. It's not about TikTok. Everybody just, and by the way, I'm guilty of that from time to time too. TikTok is a tool, but we lost the central idea. When you think about this, if a foreign country wanted to go purchase the local CBS affiliate in Wichita, Kansas, they can't, right? We have rules against foreign ownership. It just doesn't work anymore, right? The foreign ownership of media inside the United States exists today because of the new models for information transmission. We have to go back and rethink. It can't be the case that your adversary can talk to minors, or even in some sense adults, without someone saying, hang on, we're now into the world of espionage and propaganda, not transparent, open information exchange. And it's a hard problem, but one that we've got to really work on. So there is legislation that could begin to do that. Lots of smart people have thought about it. I hope we'll get that done. And we'll begin to make it harder and raise the cost for them to do it.